Okay, so now we're going to look at verbal commissioning. Verbal commissioning is one of those areas where there's a lot of grey, and uncertainty in this area is where productivity and efficiency go to die. Verbal commissioning, it's really important to understand how to do it correctly, because the reality is that is how a lot of tasks and requirements are commissioned. Think about it. Here's a situation. You walk past one of your team members. You weren't expecting to see them, and maybe they weren't expecting to see you either. You're literally in passing. You remember, oh, that's right, this task needs to be done, so I need you to do it. You have a conversation with them, could be 30 seconds, could be a little bit longer, but your mind is already on moving to where you need to get to. You've just given them a task, and there's no guarantee that by the time they get back to their desk, they're going to remember the core details of it. Heck, they might not even remember that you've given them a task. That's where the importance of verbal commissioning really comes into play, because those situations happen a lot. Or you might find it takes place in a more formal setting, like your one-to-one conversations, or maybe even your team meetings. Once again, you might be giving them the critical information, and they may not have understood that the information that you've given them was critical, or even that they have a task that's due. When this happens, on either of those examples, what comes into the organization is a lot of uncertainty, and that uncertainty means it's going to drain your resources, and it's going to have a negative impact on your productivity and efficiency. What you'll tend to see is that the person that you've just given that task, particularly in the first example, will get back to their desk and they'll think, I feel like I was given a task to do, but I can't remember the details. I'll sort this other thing out first and I'll come back to it. Meanwhile, you're finding your productivity and time is being lost. The way to address this is to go back to understanding what good commissioning looks like. In order for you to commission effectively, you need to make sure you cover off the first two key characteristics. One is ensuring you give them the what. What is expected? You're giving them a task and they need to know what their role in it is. The second part is when. It's important to give this because without it, there is no deadline. Failure to give a person a deadline usually results in time slippage, or even you having to go back and saying, where is this thing? From their point of view, because you didn't give them a time, it wasn't urgent. And now for you, it probably is. So you can preempt a lot of that by making sure you cover off those two bases first. What the thing is and when it's due by. Now, as before, there are a number of other characteristics that you want to make sure, that you can fill in for them. And it really comes back to your expectations. If you have a preference for who is going to do the task and that person is merely coordinating or they may be leading the project, then you want to be specific with that. I'm giving you this task, however, who is going to be responsible for completing it looks like this person. You can really narrow a knowledge gap by giving that advice. Also, it could be the how. If you're quite specific around how you want that task completed, then you want to be giving that as well. There's really no need for ambiguity with these. Be clear and be concise when you provide this information. It might, for some people, require a why as well. The why doesn't necessarily have to stem back to the business or the business direction or even work programs. The why could simply be this part is required by another part of the business. There's a codependency there. If you provide that information to the person you're giving that task to, it helps them understand the importance of it. Now you've given them the timeframes so they can determine the urgency, and you've also given them the importance to help them with the prioritization of it. Those are key characteristics that you can offer up to your teams as you're giving this, as you're commissioning them verbally. Now, here's a trick that every manager and leader should be using, however, many simply don't even know it exists. If you want to streamline a lot of the verbal commissioning process, or at least help narrow the gap between their understanding and your expectations, then you want to look at a technique called revoicing. Now, Revoicing is where you ask the person that you've just given the task to revoice, or at least repeat, the key takeaways from that conversation that you've had. Now, I cannot overestimate the importance of this. Failure to do this step is where the confusion comes in. This is what it looks like. Let's say in the first example, you're both on your way in passing. So you're both on your way to your separate meetings and you've caught up in passing. You've given the person the what is required, and you've also given them the when. Straight after that, you've ended up in a conversation that is completely unrelated to the topic and the task. These things happen. At the end of the conversation, before you move away from each other, you want to ask them, can you please revoice to me your understanding of the deliverable? That phrase and that sentence is once again going to save you and your team massive amounts of time and resources that are otherwise wasted because your directions may have been unclear. This is your opportunity to tell whether what you've said and your intention is what they've heard. Revoicing is an incredibly powerful technique. So once again, if you're not using it, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Now, as you start to work on your commissioning, particularly verbally, that's where you want to see it captured in a document as well. So verbal commissioning and documented or non-verbal commissioning really do go hand in hand. A good practice for your team to have is, after you've given a verbal commission, if you use a group chat, or I wouldn't encourage emails, but if you're going to use emails, so be it, is for them to simply jot down what their understanding was of the deliverable and flick it to you. This allows you to double check that the thing that you've said is actually what you intended to say. Because the reality is, as a manager, your mind, and you're a busy person, and your mind is often filled with not just that one task, but the 15 other tasks that are surrounding it as well. People make mistakes. It's important that as a leader, you don't compound the mistake, but instead you take on board what their understanding was. And if you've inadvertently given them inaccurate information, you can address it early and upfront. Okay, so there was a lot of densely packed information in there, but all of it is going to support you in your leadership journey. And not only that, it is going to, once again, value the resources that you have available to you. The time, the energy, and also just the goodwill of your staff. Because the reality is, they don't want to be chasing after doing things that aren't actually in line with your expectations. So, to revoice, when you're providing verbal commissioning, make sure you give them the what it is and when it is due by. Those two are critical. You can add on the other criteria around that. To top it off, ensure you're using the revoicing technique. I wish you all the best. Good luck.